Good afternoon, everybody, and in the East Coast, good evening, I think. They're on VTC with us. I'm Suzanne Walsh. I'm one of the deputy directors on our postsecondary team. Welcome to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for those of you who are joining us from outside of the foundation. This is a really exciting opportunity and a conversation that we've very much been looking forward to sharing with all of you between Dan Greenstein and Jamie Merisotis. The format today will be Dan will ask some provocative questions to begin with of Jamie, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for the audience. So think about all of those things you've always wanted to know. And I love that I get to do this introduction because both of these gentlemen at different points have been the boss of me. And so I can share all of the dirty little secrets I've always wanted to share. Right. That's true, too. And so, first of all, Dan Greenstein. I have to read. Dan is the director of our post-secondary team here at the foundation. Before that, he was the vice provost for academic planning and programs at the University of California Office of the President. He has led and in some cases founded several internet-based academic information services, the California Digital Library and the United Kingdom, and in the United Kingdom, the Arts and Humanities Data Service. Ooh. And Jamie Merisotis is the president and CEO of Lumina Foundation. He's also the co-founder and president of the Nonpartisan Institute for Higher Education Policy. He's well-versed in domestic and international issues. His work includes extensive global expertise with experience in Southern Africa, the former Soviet Union, Europe, and other parts of the world. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York and the Leadership Council of the Aspen Institute's Franklin Project on National Service. The thing that is in neither one of their bios that I would like to share is both of these gentlemen have read something multiple times, but they've read different things. Dan has read multiple times The Lord of the Rings. Of course he has. Jamie has read multiple times all of Shakespeare's writings. What? I know.
34 plays. It's tough.
So.
Some better than others.
Do you want to tell us your favorite?
I can't pick a favorite. It's like my kids. They're all special.
Anyway, the last thing I want to say is sometimes people say to us, is the goal really 60% like Lumina says, or is it 11 million like you say at the Gates Foundation? It's the same goal, just expressed in two different ways, but I believe calculated by the same gentleman.
Yes.
Yes. So with that in mind, I turn it over to Jamie and to Dan.
It's the problem of two funders funding the same grantee. They send you different emails. It took us 2 years.
They can charge us twice.
They can charge us twice. Jamie, thanks for joining. It's absolutely super to have you here. Just wanted to start out on a personal note. About 3.5 years ago, I became a director here at the foundation. Didn't know anything about philanthropy, except I had been on the receiving end for many years. And I guess within my first month, I had a phone call with you and then a meeting 6 or 7 weeks beyond that. And, you extended to me a great deal of collegiality and mentorship. And I have appreciated that at a personal level. And it's also obviously helped us along as a strategy. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm not so sure I'm as enthusiastic about you writing a book because that's actually setting a higher bar than I was anticipating. And the number of times that I am asked, when is my book coming out? I just want to sort of satisfy anyone in the room that it's not anytime soon, in case you were waiting. So, but thank you for doing that. So I want to begin, by asking. So obviously, we all admire the work of the Lumina Foundation. The work in higher education has been, phenomenally trend-setting, important for us here at the foundation. The interest in ensuring the nation has a greater talent pool for its workforce development needs, but also that credentials, that post-secondary credentials, are distributed more equitably. And the work has been phenomenally effective. The book that you've written, America Needs Talent, takes a much, much broader purview. It goes well beyond higher education and, frankly, well beyond post-secondary learning. And I'm just curious if you could tell us maybe a little bit about, how you came to choose that much more expanded focus for the book.
Yeah, the fact is there's a variety of reasons why I chose that approach. One is just sort of a practical one, which is I had a bunch of ideas in my head, as we all do, and you say, oh, someday I'm going to write a book. I've got all these ideas. And finally came to the point where I said, I'm going to write that book. I'm actually going to do that. The second was a sort of more deeply held view, which was that I had spent my career in the space of education. I am an advocate for education. I've been an advocate for low-income, first-generation, minority, adult learners for my entire career. And yet I always had this nagging concern, which was that as advocates for education, we were in fact advocates for a process instead of an outcome. And I think we all care about the outcome if we work in education. But when you say you're for education, you're fundamentally saying you're for a process. And to me, it's the outcome of education that matters to all of us, whether it's the learning that takes place, which is the primary focus of what I talk about consistently throughout the book, or whether it's the other elements of what we produce in education. It's really those outcomes that matter the most. But the truth is, we're not the only ones that produce those outcomes for society. The outcomes that should matter the most, as the book title suggests, in my view, is talent, which is knowledge, skills, and abilities honed by things like education and experience that fundamentally benefit both the individual and therefore all of us as a society. But those things aren't just produced in educational institutions and learning environments. They're produced through things like immigration policy and urban policy and private sector innovation. And so the book sets out to try to bring all of those things together, saying whatever the path is to get to the outcomes, the most important thing that we should be talking about is what are those outcomes that we want, and how do we actually bring these different strands of things that we tend to talk about at a societal level as separate stovepipes into the same conversation. And so it really is about talent. Talent is the thing that I think should matter most in our public policy dialogue, in our conversations within any of those sectors, because it's the outcome that matters most. And the other sort of footnote to that might be that I also didn't want to write a higher ed book because I had read some really good ones and wasn't sure I could do any better than those books. And I had seen the drafts of Kevin Carey's book, which I really admire, of Ryan Craig's book, of Michael Crow's book, and I thought they had a lot of the elements of what I was interested in thinking about in the higher ed space. Now I take some different tacks as well in my book, but I also didn't want to write yet another higher ed book. It's caused some interesting reactions in the space of higher education, and frankly a little bit of fear in our grantee community that somehow Lumina is going to go in a totally different direction, which I can assure you we are not. Though we are learning from this experience in ways that maybe I'll talk about later that may actually refine how we articulate what we're doing. But fundamentally, I wrote the book because I felt like there was space for it, and hopefully as a voice in the space, I can contribute some new ideas and some new thinking.
No, it's great. And I should mention that there's a bunch of copies sitting out there, and we'll make them available to you after the presentation. So for those of you who have not read it, you will have an opportunity to do so. There's an interesting chapter in the book which draws on a wealth of experience that I know you've had in federal public policy. I know you've seen the best of what the government can do. I imagine you've seen other aspects as well. And yet in the book, you call for the creation of a Department of Talent. For those who haven't read it, it's a kind of an amalgamation of existing agencies, much as Homeland Security was an amalgamation. Right. Usual suspects: Department of Labor, Department of Ed. Bringing functions together in a Department of Talent. And I'm just again curious. How did you come to that conclusion, to that recommendation? And then I want to sort of probe the practicality a little bit and.
Yeah, let me first explain where the idea came from. I've actually had this idea in my head for a while. I use this analogy in one of my book talks I've been doing around the country for you Harry Potter fans. So, in Harry Potter, Voldemort is the he who shall not be named, right? This was the idea that I shall not actually name in writing for fear that I would be ridiculed. I had this idea for a long time, but I thought, boy, people are going to really boo me off the stage with this idea. But I decided to put it in the book for the same reason that I just articulated, which is that fundamentally I believe the federal government should be talking about the outcomes that should matter the most. And those outcomes really are talent. So let me explain the idea in a little more detail, and then we can talk about the practicality. So what I propose, first and foremost, is not more government, it's actually less. That earned me some points with conservatives, by the way, which is that I actually want to consolidate what we do. So I want to take the entire U.S. Department of Education and its mission of educational excellence and equity, which I strongly believe in, bring that together with the Employment and Training Administration, which focuses on workforce development and dislocated workers from the U.S. Department of Labor, and bring that together with the talent recruitment functions that we have in the Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, is an example of a failed government merger, in my opinion, thus far. I do not believe it has gone the way that we should have, or at least it is not yet successful. Maybe I should put it that way, because I think there are a lot of problems and challenges with Homeland Security as an example. So I recognize that there are pluses and minuses to whether or not you can do this. The idea there was to actually articulate common goals that we should have at the federal level in terms of the outcomes that we want to achieve, to create more intergovernmental collaboration than really exists. So 2 decades of my life I spent in Washington, D.C., and I saw administrations come in, and labor secretaries and assistant secretaries profess great interest in collaboration across the two agencies, and then they would beat the heck out of each other in public and private over and over again and talk about how the other doesn't get what they're doing. Jane Oates, who was the Assistant Secretary of Labor, the perfect, you couldn't have someone better than Jane, spent her career as Ted Kennedy's education advisor, as the Secretary of the Executive Director of the New Jersey Department of Higher Education, comes in as Assistant Secretary overseeing ETA, and ran into the same buzzsaw that everyone else has done. Could not create the collaboration. You got to bring them all under one roof in order to be able to create that kind of collaboration. And I think it sends a signal to employers, to our educational institutions, to our global competitors, that the federal government is actually serious about the outcomes that we need out of our federal investments. Not the processes of how do we support workforce development programs, not the processes of how do we improve visa application processes and efforts around building better efforts to recruit foreign-born talent, but actually focus on the outcomes that we want. And the outcomes that we want as a society and that our federal government should contribute to as one player is talent.
Yeah. So what would you see as a practical early step, whether by this administration or
it's
next?
a hugely complicated thing to do. Let me be clear that what I'm talking about would be extremely difficult. One of the biggest reasons why it would be difficult is that it would be very difficult to get through Congress because of the jurisdictional questions. You literally have separate committees that oversee these different entities, and they wouldn't want to give up control. So that's a real practical problem. But I recognize the challenge of it. My favorite, this is, of all the press that my book has gotten, this has been the one thing that's probably gotten the most attention, particularly from the DC-based press. The headline in the article in National Journal, which was my favorite, was, "It's not a crazy idea," and which I thought was very validating to my perspective, because I think that the issue that we would have to confront in taking those first few baby steps is actually figuring out what are the things that those agencies share in common at an operational level that they could actually start doing together. Think about linking the standards-driven K-12 education reforms with the workforce development programs, with what we're trying to do in terms of talent recruitment in Homeland Security and in Citizenship and Immigration Service, for example. Huge, huge opportunities that you could actually bring together and actually set some common goals that at an operational level you could articulate to bring those things together. But I am the first to say it would be complicated. I've had conversations with several people in Washington about this, and the reactions have ranged from amazing idea, have no idea how we do it, to I'm looking forward to the next administration taking on this challenge.
Right. That's fabulous. The book is filled with all sorts of interesting recommendations. The other one, which struck me, really had to do with immigration. Partly because you've mentioned it, already. It obviously makes sense, and it contributes enormously to the wealth of talent that the nation needs. But it also comes out at a time, when America is swinging, I think, in general, to a much more kind of isolationist position. So talk a little bit about, the recommendation itself, but I'm also really curious to know how it's being received now, given the political environment.
So I finished the book just about a year ago. The book's been out since September, but I fundamentally finished most of the book last December. Worked with an editor for a few months, but it was basically done. And when I finished it, I thought, boy, this is the most radical idea I've got in the book. Not the Department of Talent idea. This is the most radical idea. Nothing like a presidential campaign to sort of change your view of what a radical idea is about a subject. And so it now seems very mainstream and tame in comparisons. In fact, I've actually done a fair amount of talk radio, most of which does not skew to the left. And it's actually gotten a surprisingly good reaction because it's actually seen as a sort of practical idea. So my idea is pretty straightforward, which is that we actually have to stop treating immigration as a problem. Immigration as a process has problems. So it does. Border security is something we've got to tackle, we've got to take on. But to treat immigration as a problem is fundamentally wrong. Immigration is a huge part of who we are as a country. It is fundamental to our American values and beliefs. We're a country that was established with this fundamental idea that immigrants are a core part of who we are. And I try to pull together some evidence in the book about the value of immigrants that many of you have seen to entrepreneurship, to our cultural well-being, et cetera, et cetera. But what we have wrong, I think, in the United States is this very fragmented approach to immigration and a very confused environment where we're trying to treat symptoms of problems in immigration as opposed to what we want out of it. What do we want out of immigration? We want talent. Talent is fundamentally should be our primary goal of our immigration policies. And it turns out we actually have good models that we can look at from other countries to learn from. Australia and Canada being the two most prominent examples, both of which are flawed models, neither of which are perfect, but both have developed sophisticated, what they call skills-based immigration models, where they actually have logical processes for saying, as part of our immigration strategy, we are actually going to, not just at the high end, which is where a lot of people want to go, but at the high end, the middle end, and the low end, say, how do we actually recruit the talent that we need to be successful as a country here in the 21st century? And that idea, I thought, was a fairly radical idea until people started talking about deporting 11 million people. Then it doesn't seem like a very radical idea. But I continue to think that if we don't change the nature of the conversation about immigration in this country, we are fundamentally going to miss an opportunity to actually add to our talent base at a critical time when we need to add to that talent base. Immigration is a complement to our talent cultivation strategies. So talent cultivation is education and urban policy and all those other things. Talent attraction is largely immigration, right? So you want to augment what you're doing through the talent attraction strategies. Immigration is a good way to do that. But if we treat immigration as this massive problem, as people who are immigrants as part of the problems of our society, we're fundamentally missing the point about how important immigration is to our historic and current success and how important it's going to be in the future.
Yeah, no, I remember actually reading the 2025 goals, the foundation's goals, your foundation's goals with respect of higher ed credentialing, and immigration, if I remember correctly, contributes pretty significly towards the goal.
That's absolutely right. So we have to recognize that foreign talent is a key part of how you get there, both as a practical matter, but again, it also adds this energy, this vibe, this perspective that we don't have if we close the borders and simply focus on cultivation alone as the only strategy.
So what do you see as the role for private philanthropy in moving, whether it's the broader agenda or the higher ed agenda that you're currently working through with Lumina that we're working on together? Where do you see philanthropy kind of making a difference, contributing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question in part because, so I had this view when I'm starting my 9th year at Lumina Foundation, hard to believe, that I came into philanthropy believing that that philanthropy has this sort of defined role that we can touch and be clear about, et cetera. And once I got on the inside, I realized it was a lot messier. And I actually think the messiness is a good thing. I think philanthropy needs to have a wide array of roles in getting to these outcomes, the goals that I talk about in the book. Not one way, not a unified approach, but a different set of ways. But fundamentally, I think we need to be leadership organizations in this space. We do not have the capital, the actual financial ability to create a whole lot of change, despite the fact that people believe we have massive amounts of resources. We really don't. Our resources are dwarfed by what's in government, what's in private capital markets. It's a very small amount of resources. What we have is thought leadership ability, ability to actually not only support innovation, but contribute to the scaling through a variety of different efforts. And we have the ability to take large risk that others can't. And I find myself puzzled when I talk to some people in philanthropy, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does not fit in this category, but when I talk to some people in philanthropy who say, we don't do that in philanthropy. And my response to that is, who's we? And by the way, why not? Why don't we do that? Because we have this ability to take risk that no one else has. Voters aren't going to vote us out of office if they don't like our ideas. Shareholders aren't going to throw us out. So our ability to take risk is one of our greatest strengths. In this space of talent development and deployment, we have got to take more of the risk, which means thinking about some of these big ideas that are going to create large-scale change. So a shared interest that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Lumina have is in competency-based learning. It's a big idea. It's flipping the system on its head in a lot of ways. It's going to take time. It's messy. There's not a single model out there. Nobody's got it right yet. But fundamentally, it's a big idea that's worth taking some risk on. And I think that not just our two foundations, but many others need to try a variety of different approaches to try to create scalable and spreadable, as one of my colleagues says, change in this space, because I think it's really important to get to those talent outcomes that we need.
And so how do you mitigate the risk, of course, of taking, I agree with you, but the risk, of course, of taking that approach is twofold. One of them is obviously being seen as being unbridled, overly influential in a field where foundations have no business. And then the second is where foundations happen to work together, complement each other, as ours do occasionally, and as we do with other foundations, the idea that there's collusion afoot. And so how do you counter those risks while pursuing those leadership and bold kinds of activities that you've identified?
Yes. Matthew Bishop from The Economist has this blog called Philanthropic Capitalism. I don't know if any of you have seen it. That's pretty interesting. And, he tries to get at some of this sort of evolution of what we're calling philanthropy. I actually think on your first question that the critique and the scrutiny is healthy for us. Yeah. I actually think it's a good thing for people to say, what are they up to? What are they really trying to achieve, et cetera. It's hard for me to articulate, but I do believe there are differences between the basic charitable impulse, which is to sort of create some direct service, some direct change, with the kinds of things that maybe Kresge and Lumina and Bill and Melinda Gates and some others do, and what you've seen with Omidyar, what you're going to now see with the Zuckerbergs and others. There's a sort of continuum of things that are all philanthropically minded. They all have philanthropic goals, but their execution is pretty different. And I think that we should be mindful of the fact that they're not all the same thing. Yeah. And that fundamentally it's a good thing. If we're trying to create social change, it's a good thing. But there are differences between charity on one end, the kind of mission-driven, focused approaches of foundations like Bill and Melinda Gates, and the kinds of things where there is more of a direct interest in what happens to the capital that's invested that you're seeing in some of these new models, some of these emerging models. Yeah. And I think that's fine. On the issue of collusion, boy, I think that people think we are way more sophisticated than we really are. If they believe we can be that good to be that collusive, I think it's quite fascinating. We are transparent. We share lots of information. We are good colleagues, but we do things differently. We approach it in different ways. And even if we share goals, and we share a lot of goals, frankly, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in the post-secondary space, which is wonderful. I just don't see it as collusive. I think that we both have a healthy skepticism of our own work, and literally meaning Lumina has a skepticism of Lumina's work, and I think that that's probably a good thing. But sharing and being transparent and learning from each other, I think that's a wonderful thing. I wish we had the problem of collusion. I'm really not worried about that.
Actually, I want to just pursue that in a slightly different direction. You had some interesting discussion in the book about new forms of social impact investing, and which I think are fascinating. And I know we've talked about this in other venues. Maybe could you just illuminate us on your thoughts around different kinds of ways to invest in change and change? Process.
Yeah, so I am one of those people who thinks that places like Lumina should be thinking more about that issue of the return of capital. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't. But it is a tool in the toolbox. That's the key, right? So we've got grant making. We've got convening. We've got our efforts around thought leadership and public policy and other things. And social impact investing, strategic social investing, whatever you want to call it, is one tool in that toolbox. In this case, I think what's interesting to think about is what could we do with our capacity that hasn't been done so far? And so a couple of examples that I mentioned in the book. One is to use performance-based contracting or social innovation bonds or any of those continuum of tools to actually invest in places that have the potential to achieve really large-scale impact, right? So not on the margins, but 10x, 20x return on the investment. And that's really interesting. And we are building a social investing function at Lumina. Our director of strategic social investments literally sits between the grant side and the investment side. He's building his own portfolio. I've given him some resources to start with, to think about investing in for-profit, not-for-profit, or maybe something new, like B Corps. Right now, the conversation about B Corps, which is the other idea that I get into a little bit in the book, is largely focused on the conversion of for-profits to B Corps. I'm much less interested in that than I am in the creation of wholly new B Corps, where profit is still acceptable, but it's not the primary goal, right? Your fiduciary obligation is literally different from a legal perspective when you're a B corporation. And thinking about out-of-the-box new B Corps that are focused on talent development and deployment would be really interesting. We're going to invest in some of that to see if we can help create some of those organizations that have the potential to do well and do good. And we'll see. Yeah. It's a risk. Yeah. We'll see if the risk pays off.
So it's a natural point, I think, to ask the question that you kind of anticipated early on, which is, what are you learning from the process of writing the book and the experience of being out on the road talking about it and just engaging with folks around the ideas that you're seeing having some influence on the work at Lumina? I assume that the social impact investing is one.
That's one element. Another element, I don't think this would come as a huge surprise to any of you in the room who follow Lumina, is that in a certain way, Lumina actually stopped being the higher ed foundation a few years ago. We just actually didn't say it. We're really the post-secondary learning foundation. That's the best way to think about us. We're large. We have a single focus, a very narrow mission. We're unusual in philanthropy in general. But I think our perception was that we were the higher ed, the college access and success foundation. And now I think we've come to realize that, in fact, we are the Postsecondary Learning Foundation, and that our efforts, whether they're aimed at colleges and universities, or whether it's through efforts around workforce development programs, whether it's what industry is doing, whether it's these wholly new entities like these B Corps. I even mentioned in the book libraries, museums, other existing cultural enterprises that I think we should really be seeing increasingly as post-secondary learning enterprises. What we care the most about at Lumina, and how the book has probably impacted our thinking, is that post-secondary learning is really where our niche is, where our focus should be, and it's the outcomes of all of those different processes that fundamentally should matter to us in terms of our work. So, ironically, the 60% goal has always been, from the day we set it in 2008, Suzanne, when I got there, was that it was about high-quality post-secondary degrees, certificates, and other credentials. So, we've articulated that a credential of some type is what's got to signify that you know and can do something with your post-secondary learning. But fundamentally, it's been who we've been about now for 8 years. We just didn't actually internalize it and really find a way to express it. And I think the book has helped to bring some of that out.
No, it's interesting. So I want to obviously leave some time for audience Q&A, but I one area that we struggle with, and this in our work, is that we can achieve our goals, our credentialing productivity goals, and fail completely against our equity goals. The math actually works. You can hit 60%, but leave out folks, people of color, and underrepresented minorities, et cetera. And so you've obviously taken a lead at Lumina through the equity imperative. I think demonstrating another capability, actually moral imperative, I think, for private philanthropies. It certainly sent a signal to us, and we're looking very carefully, as you know, at our equity practice and our equity mindsets and the nature of our grant making. What would you encourage us and other foundations, other private philanthropies to think about with respect to their practice, their strategies, to ensure that the economic development goals don't totally overrun the equally important equity considerations?
Make it fundamental to every strategy and every project that you invest in. That's the easiest way to think about it, right? Which is that this is not, we've got 6 things we're doing and one of them is equity. No. Equity is part of what you're doing in everything that you're doing. And if you approach the work that way, in Lumina's case, whether it's our work through working with higher ed institutions on student success, or whether it's our efforts working in communities, or our work with what we're doing in public policy efforts, whatever the space may be, if you fundamentally see it as underpinning all of the work, I think it really strengthens your thinking. And you've got to keep at it. You can't get comfortable with this issue and say, oh, well, if we just report our data based on race, ethnicity, and other things, we're meeting our equity objectives. No, you're not, actually. You've actually got to better understand how your equity objectives are going to evolve and change over time as the space changes. So, much earlier in my career, I was writing about digital learning and technology, and I go as far back as to when we called it distance learning. Back then, I was trying to articulate this view that, in fact, there's a real problem with technology because of the digital divide, because of access to technology. Well, we now know that that's a much more complicated topic to talk about than it was in the past, because, in fact, in some ways, the gap has narrowed, right, in terms of access to technology. But now we have issues about application of the technology, about the changing nature of it, et cetera. So the space changed. And the point is, we need to change in our thinking about issues related to equity as well. They are not static issues. Yeah. And the immigrant populations are changing. The nature of what's happening in our urban areas is evolving. What's happening in our educational institutions is changing. And we've got to think about that fundamentally when it comes to these issues of equity, and to think hard about, as we are doing now in our planning for our next strategic plan. We operate in these 4-year strategic planning cycles. So the next one will be 2017 to 2020. we're trying to think hard about, we made a clear statement in our equity imperative around racial and ethnic equity. But it seems that we should be thinking about this in a broader way, but you want to be careful about not making it about everything and therefore nothing along the way. But it seems like there are other elements of equity that we really need to be focused on, and I think we are. Our work in student finance is obviously highly focused on low-income populations as one element of equity, as is your amazing work in this space. But thinking about it in different ways, I think, is going to be really important. And we're still, I'm not sure where we're going to land on that, but I think we're going to have a more nuanced view of the work, while not in any way letting up on the accelerator on racial and ethnic equity issues. Because I think they are fundamental. They are non-negotiable in my view.
That's great. Last question, lightning round. So you put the pen down on the book probably almost a year ago, as you said. It's been out. You've been touring, talking to folks about it. Is there a chapter you didn't write that you wish you had, or a chapter you did write that you wish perhaps you hadn't?
State policy. So I did not. So it was intentional, actually, to leave out state policy. And so I have to tell you the funny reason why that is. I really didn't want to write a long book because I hate long books. I don't read them. And I didn't want to write a book that I didn't think other people would read. And I worried that my state policy chapter was going to be even longer than my federal policy chapter. And so I do regret that, because I think it has left some people with the impression that Jamie Merisotis thinks that government policy only runs through the federal government. That was clearly not my intent. And if you follow Lumina's work, obviously we invest way more in state policy than federal policy. So I'd probably take a mulligan on that one. The other thing that I have thought more about, at least since I wrote the book, is whether I overemphasize the economic outcomes of talent and the monetary benefits. So one of the ideas that I have in the book, which is essentially just a modification of ideas that others have developed before, but I propose this thing called the gross talent product in the book, which is essentially a way of articulating the market and non-market monetary value of talent on society. We can actually measure both market and non-market benefits in really concrete ways now. And I think that's great. But to express it in monetary terms, I think reinforced the point here that people were afraid of, which is that it's only about the money.
Right.
And so finding better ways to articulate what are those non-market benefits, quality of life, things like that, in ways that can be expressed beyond monetary terms, I think would be really valuable. But it's hard. We struggle for the language. We struggle for the ways to articulate that. It's one of the reasons why in higher education, for many years, college presidents have said, go to college and make $1 million more than you used to make. But then when we get to what do you get on the other side? And you say, well, you're a more effective citizen, and you're a better participant in our community, and it just isn't nearly as resonant with people as the concrete monetary stuff. Even though we believe it, and in fact, in some ways, we believe in it more than we do the monetary side. It's easier to talk about the monetary stuff, and I think I may have fallen a little bit for that as well. And when I wrote the book.
That's great. Thank you very much. I wanted to open it up to audience questions, and Suzanne has a mic. Is there another mic in the room? Or maybe Pam has a mic?
And while you're queuing up your question, I know you told me how to. Okay, yes, I see you. I have is this on? Yes. Oh, okay. I was passed a secret note that there's a box of books that has not yet arrived. I don't know who is stealing your books. Let me just say this first of all. So
desperate people.
This is a very exciting book, clearly, just like Harry Potter. But just for staff, anyone who works at the foundation, we'll let our guests get the books today, and then we will find them in the missing box. That was my very critical announcement. Okay, and tell us your name, where you're from, and then.
Hi, my name is Chad Magan. I'm a representative, ranking member of the House Education Committee. So I found that your focus on economic issues was refreshing because it's easy to measure.
Yeah.
A lot of the other stuff is very just difficult to get your hands around. And the fact that you've been focusing on not only completion rates, but starting salaries, placement rates, 5-year salaries, things like that, I think is a measurement we haven't been taking in the past. With regard to equity, though, it's great for us to try to get a handle on the economic growth potential. And on the K-12 system, we've been focusing more on growth rather than absolute scores.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you can't take the same approach to measuring economic growth. So, for example, kids from tough economic situations, tough demographics, have much lower wage potential going into many of these programs of study. And so is there any effort to try to model their wage potential going in so you can actually get a delta on the value added from a program so you're really getting a true ROI type analysis?
Yeah, I really like that idea, by the way. I think that's good. I also think that you've got to see that as one tool in the toolbox, right? The danger there is oversimplification. And I am, spent my career in the sphere of public policy. You know this from your hard practical experience. There's no magic bullet, right? There is no magic bullet. And everybody wants to come up with the big idea that's going to change everything. And we fall for this in education all the time. In fact, when I was starting my career in the 80s, this is an ironic statement, by the way, we were very concerned about student loans. A sort of echo of the louder and louder drumbeat that we have now. So our solution was, what are we going to do about the growth in student loans, and particularly about the abuse of the student loan programs? Well, let's report default rates by institution as the single measure. Well, as one measure, not a bad idea, right? Like if an institution has a high default rate, that's probably an indicator that there's some other stuff going on. But there may be lots of reasons why, right? It's who you're serving. It's the nature of the kinds of programs that mission of that institution might have, et cetera. So I like your idea, and particularly this idea of expressing it as ROI. I think is very valuable, very important. But let's figure out how to make that one of the tools in the toolbox. And the other point I guess I would make is if there's any lesson that we should take from almost 25 years now since A Nation at Risk, is that if you talk about reform and talk about a single outcome, a single test, a single approach, et cetera, you eventually run into the buzzsaw of public opinion that you just can't simplify. You can't reduce it to that fundamental level. People just push back against it. They say, no, it's not that simple. And they're probably right. On the other hand, you actually absolutely should articulate it in concrete, quantitative and qualitative terms, and don't fall for this argument that, it's so esoteric and unusual and amazing you can't possibly describe it. Right.
Hi, Brad Bernatek from the College Ready team. I'm curious, this question of immigration as being kind of a strategic component more and a complement to our education system. I'm curious if you've gotten any pushback or what the reaction has been in the education community to the fact that oftentimes you'll see migration or immigration as sort of evidence that our education system is failing. Like, we need this many degrees, we get this many, there's this delta that's indicative of, the problems of our own education system. So I'm kind of curious what reaction you've gotten in the educational community to think about immigration as a whole and sort of even regional migration as a complement, as opposed to sort of a more of complementary as opposed to competitive.
I haven't seen a lot of pushback in that from now. It may be because of the skewed audiences I'm speaking to. I'm not sure, but I haven't seen a lot of pushback on that. And I think that the issue of whether or not it's a sign of failure is an interesting conversation to have, right? Which is that I think there are always ways in which, if you think about immigration as sort of market perfecting, right, which is that it really is a complement to what you do. I don't know that education should feel threatened by that. Education should feel threatened In some ways, it's deserved by other things that are going on. But I'm not sure immigration is the real threat to education. I think the democratization of learning is much more of a threat to the way that we traditionally have delivered education to schools, to colleges and universities. I think that's much more of a threat than this idea of immigration. There is an interesting point that you raised, though, about the question about thinking about this in regional terms and in terms of regional labor markets, and because immigration plays out in very different ways depending on where you are. And so, anyways, just think about it. This part of the country has a very different set of objectives and what's happening in immigration than, say, the southeastern United States. And so, that's just a fact, something that you've got to deal with. But I just have not seen a whole lot of fear. I think the education people are afraid of a lot of things, but this one hasn't risen to the top of the list.
You want to contextualize both in-migration and out-migration in the context of a rapidly evolving global economy, right? So you're going to expect lots more movement going forward, and I think the question is how to adjust internally, nationally, so that the labor force, the workforce, is prepared to participate effectively in that economy, both within our boundaries and outside them. Sorry, I didn't mean to intervene.
Hi, Jamie. Good to see you, and thanks for the work you've done. Oh, Christine Johnson, Community Colleges of Spokane, Chancellor. I hope you'll write the state policy book, and you spend a lot of time in every state. How are we going to reach the talent that America needs at a time there is such public disinvestment in higher education across the country?
Yeah, it's a legitimate question. As you know, Lumina Foundation has expressed a view here, which is that money is not going to solve the problem. And we continue to believe that money is not going to solve the problem. On the other hand, it's hard to argue that the absence of money is going to solve the problem either. And so the question really is, what's the nature of that investment? And I think that's the conversation that we're trying to push, which is, what are you actually getting? Back to your point about ROI, what are you actually getting for the dollars that you're investing? I think we have made some mistakes in education, which is that we resisted this ROI analysis. And as a result, we now don't really have the evidence, the data systems, the capacity to actually articulate what I think we believe we produce in the sector. And so policymakers are saying, show us that you're producing that. I think if we do that, if we embrace that, we will actually earn greater investment, as we should, because I do think we need greater investment. The second point is that I think government has constraints at all levels that have nothing to do with us, that have to do with lots of other broader systemic things. And I don't see government somehow radically coming up with, and this is not in any way a political statement, but the $350 billion that Hillary Clinton hopes we can get for higher education. I just don't see that. I don't see how, under what environment we would actually get those kind of resources. It's one of the reasons why I suggest that in thinking about where you get investment, private capital markets have to be seen as a complement to what government does. That in fact, private capital markets have a social responsibility that they should be rise to the challenge. And I think if we can tap that, private capital markets have. I do really simple math in the book, and I say that if we took 1/10 of 1%, or 1/100th of 1%, right, 1 basis point for you economists in the room, and what private capital markets have invested, and apply it to talent development and deployment in the United States, it would be greater than the investment of the entire federal government in education and training. So, there is capacity to do this. The question is, can we muster the will? And I think the starting point's got to be us in the education sector. We've got to demonstrate that, in fact, we can produce the outcomes that society needs economically and socially, because then I think we will earn that greater investment from all investors.
My name is Ed Smith-Lewis. I'm a program officer on our Postsecondary Success Team. I would like to start by thanking Lumina for their leadership on their equity work, specifically with their equity imperative. I actually wanted to follow up on the equity question, and I appreciate again, too, that you said sort of equity has to be sort of has to undergird the full strategy. My question to you is, as we think about our role in philanthropy is often driven by strategy. When there are stressors that sit outside of your strategies, particularly education, that may impact the results or the intended outcomes on equity within education, how do you think about partnering other activities that sit outside your strategy to solve for a solution that's within your strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question, and frankly, it's a limitation of a single issue focused, mission driven foundation like Lumina, right? Which is, okay, Jamie, so what are we going to do about social welfare? What are we going to do about housing? What are we going to do about all of these other factors that actually impact the well-being, the lives of all people who deserve a greater opportunity and greater chances for equity? So it's a big challenge. This is not a profound statement, but collaboration is obviously the most important element of that. None of us are going to solve these problems on our own through a single strategy. It's not going to happen. And so doing a better job of articulating how our investments on what we're doing in one area actually link to another is really important. So take it from a different perspective. Think about Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation as, like Lumina, a foundation that's heavily focused on a single issue, right? Health is all they do at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. They're larger than we are. They've been very influential in this space. My colleague, Risa, is increasingly talking about the social determinants of health and how you actually get to higher levels of health. Well, education's one way you do that. You start to go through the list, and you realize these things are all interconnected. And so it's got to be a collaborative model. We actually have capacity to collaborate or collude, depending on how people see it. But opportunity to collaborate that I think are really important, that we probably need to seize more of. If I can take another gentle swipe at us in our sector here of philanthropy, there does tend to be moments when I'm sitting in meetings at Lumina or in meetings with some of our colleagues in other foundations, and I think to myself, oh, come on, we did not just invent that idea. This is something that we should be talking to other people about, and we are not nearly as brilliant as we sometimes think we are. That requires some level of transparency to actually come together and to say, hey, Dan, what are you guys doing in that space? Or to do the same thing with Bill Moses at Kresge or whoever it might be, and actually have a candid conversation about the totality of this work and how we actually bring it all together to achieve greater outcomes. So part of it is just collaborating, doing a better job and collaborating across our spheres. And part of it is obviously outside of collaborating with other foundations, actually seeing these partnerships with whether it's the private capital markets or with the social sector, whatever it may be.
Is there one more question? I think we have time for one more. There's two more. All right. Three. Oh, my goodness. How much can you take there?
Maybe more. Jill Wakefield, Seattle Colleges. So you have a lot of presidents and vice presidents and college administrators in this room. As we leave, one thought might be read the book. Yeah. But tell me...
Definitely.
After we read the book, tell me two or three things that you would want us to start thinking about or spending some time focusing on as we leave today and go back to really trying to create such amazing change in our colleges and communities.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have, any profound advice there. One is, and I come back to why I wrote the book, think every day about what those outcomes are that you're trying to produce, and how those outcomes aren't just being produced on your campus, but are being produced in lots of different ways, and how you can leverage that, how you can create better partnerships with employers in your community, how you can create more opportunity to think about whether these community-based organizations in your community can actually be effective partners in producing the talent outcomes that the citizens of that community actually need. So that would be one thing. The second is my point about the undergirding. I do think that we need to do more and better when it comes to equity in higher education. I think it's a fundamental value. I think we believe in it in higher education. But when push comes to shove, because of the challenges of resources that Christine was pointing out, we often take the money first. And that's not good for society. If there's one other piece of advice, get out of your shell, get out of your own context, and spend more time with your colleagues and partners. And I think, and I've said this not just in the book, but for a long time, I think college presidents can be really effective voices in the public policy context. And instead what they do is they become advocates for their own very narrow interests. And so, if you're a state legislator, you really get tired of President X talking about why their institution needs more resources. If President X talked more about why investment in the sector is going to lead to much greater outcomes for this state, for the community that we live in, et cetera, your institution may be better off. But boy, it is often a process where it's largely about here's what we need because here's what we can produce in our institution without understanding that you're part of an ecosystem of providers of post-secondary learning that are all trying to produce outcomes. And being a more effective advocate for that in a broader sense, finding ways to actually give policymakers better ideas about what needs to change, I think would be really helpful.
The president from Walla Walla is going to build directly on that, isn't he?
Well, Jamie, Steve Van Osdol, I have read your book, and after I ask this question, you'll probably suggest I read it several times. But one thing is I appreciated you gave us a history of how we got here and the importance of immigration and the value of higher education and the entire education system. And it seemed like our country had a strong will to succeed and saw education as a solution forward. Your section talking about the present raises a lot of serious questions, whether we have the will or the wallet. But one thing I appreciated, you did talk about the need for kind of a shared vision in our country in terms of the context of global competition. And then you point to Korea and you point to Canada and say they're way ahead in terms of their educational attainment rates. Has that solved their problem? What lessons have you learned by studying some of the competition? Can we learn from our Canadians to the north? Is it that much better because their educational attainment rates are up there at 60%? Yeah. Korea seems to be extraordinarily effective. Public policy makers at the federal and state level, I think, are looking for a return to justify higher investments. You also talk about how our country's having to use a lot of our discretionary money for Social Security systems, and that's drawing funds out of the educational system. Yeah. So it looks to me like we're moving towards a crisis unless we figure out a solution. Yeah. What lessons did you learn from the global competition?
Yeah, I think there's actually two elements to what you point out here that are probably worth exploring. One is why, as you saw in the book, why am I an optimist? So that's probably a fair question to ask because I express an optimistic view despite the fact that I say where we are right now isn't very good. A part of it is belief, right? I believe that we are an unusual country in the world in terms of all of those things that we've been talking about here this afternoon, about the fact that we are a country of very different perspectives regionally and the immigrant culture and all of those things. But we've come together and demonstrated an ability to come together at amazing times in our history that I think we still have. I still think it's there. But as I point out in the book, we have to have a different plan than the one that we had in the past. Fixing our schools is not going to fundamentally change what we do unless we actually get all of those people who are getting through our high schools into post-secondary learning contexts and getting high-quality credentials they can actually take into the labor market and be successful. And so as important as Bill and Melinda Gates' extraordinary work is in college readiness, all of that work is about getting people to the starting line. The finish line has got to be a high-quality post-secondary credential because that's what the labor market needs. That's what our society needs. I think that's very clear. So I also think that from the perspective of my optimism, that back to the no magic bullet theory, that you've actually got to think about the totality of these ideas, which is why if we had a shared conversation about talent and the different pathways to get to talent, for me as an individual, for us as a society, I think that could fundamentally change the conversation. What I think I've learned from the work that we've done at Lumina and my own experience working in so many other national contexts outside of the U.S. in my career is that nobody has a model that we can actually copy and apply here. So let's not try to do that. Canadians have good ideas. Koreans have good ideas. South Africans have good ideas. Lots of places where I have learned a lot. But what we've got to figure out is how we actually apply those lessons in our unique context in the U.S. So again, it's adaptation, not adoption. It's actually thinking about how we can actually learn from what they've done. So I can tell you in great detail why, as exciting as it is to see what they've done in Korea with their 64% attainment rate, they've achieved that through a very narrow sphere, and the American economy wouldn't be able to sustain what they've done in Korea in the very narrow sphere of what their post-secondary training is looking like. But it has worked for them, and we should learn some things from that we can apply in our context. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's say, oh, they're so different from us, we can't learn anything from them. That's a little too jingoistic for me. But let's learn from them. Let's learn what the Australians have learned. Let's learn what we've seen from some of the Scandinavian countries, et cetera, and let's apply that to our unique context here. But fundamentally, it is about getting to the point where we actually craft the strategies that meet our needs and meet our objectives as a country. And those needs and those objectives are about the outcome of talent. Talent is what matters most.
That's great. Jamie, I want to thank you for joining us. A super conversation.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate your time and your energy. Thank you for your leadership, for writing the book. Thank the audience for coming. Join us for refreshment just outside, and copies of Jamie's books are also available. But before we do that, let's join me in giving a round of applause to our guests. Thank you.